Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my HOA Karen Tales channel? Thank you so much. Imagine waking up on a peaceful Saturday morning, stepping onto your porch with a cup of coffee, only to find your backyard transformed into a lavish wedding venue without your permission. White folding chairs were neatly arranged in rows, an elegant floral arch at the center, a string quartet playing soft classical music, and dozens of guests in formal attire sipping champagne from fluted glasses. It took a few seconds for my brain to register what I was seeing. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and then focused again. Nope, still there. Someone had thrown a full-blown wedding in my backyard, and I had absolutely no idea how or why. Then I spotted her, the one person I despised more than anyone else in this neighborhood. Barbara Middleton, the HOA president, standing by the buffet table, basking in the admiration of her well-dressed guests as if she had orchestrated the event herself. My blood boiled. I marched straight toward her. "Oh, good morning, dear," she chirped, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "I was wondering when you'd come out to join us." "Join you, Barbara? What the hell is going on?" I snapped, scanning the pristine decorations that cover my yard. "Why is there a wedding in my backyard?" She gave a dismissive wave, as if I had just asked why the sky was blue. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. We needed a venue, and your yard was just sitting there empty. It was the perfect space." "I gebte her. Are you kidding me? You didn't even ask. This is trespassing. How'd you even set this up?" "Oh, it was simple, really." She sipped her champagne, completely unfazed. "We've been planning it for weeks. I gave the vendors the gate code, and a few of us came in yesterday evening to set up. Honestly, you should be thanking me. Your backyard looks absolutely stunning, far better than all those tacky lawn ornaments you insist on keeping." I was speechless. My anger was bubbling over, but Barbara continued, completely oblivious, or maybe just indifferent, to the fury radiating off me. "Besides," she continued, "this is for the benefit of the community. The bride is my niece, and her parents' yard wasn't big enough for the reception. So, being the generous person I am, I offered a solution. You should be honored to host such a lovely event." Honored? I nearly choked on the word. "Barbara, I don't even know these people. And you didn't just set up chairs. You have a full catering station, a bar, a live band. You're hosting an entire wedding on my property without my permission." She waved her hand as if shooing away my words. "Oh, please, it's just for a few hours. Besides, you never use your backyard. It's practically wasted space." That was it. That was the final straw. The audacity, the entitlement, the absolute nerve of this woman. I looked around at the guests happily chatting, oblivious to the fact that they were attending an event built on pure trespassing. The bride and groom were at the far end of the yard, posing for pictures near my favorite oak tree, as if this were some high-end wedding venue. They had rented. No one even seemed to care that I was standing there, the actual owner of the property, glaring at them like a furious landlord about to evict their tenants. I took a deep breath, clenching my fists. "All right, Barbara, you have exactly 5 minutes to get everyone out before I call the cops." Her expression flickered just for a moment before she gave a condescending laugh. "Oh, don't be ridiculous. You wouldn't ruin a wedding over something so small." I pulled out my phone. "Watch me." She scoffed, her confidence barely wavering. "By the time they arrive, the wedding will be nearly over anyway. And do you really want to be the villain who ruined my niece's special day?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip over a table and send her stupid champagne fountain crashing to the ground. But I knew Barbara. She thrived on manipulation, on pushing boundaries until people gave up and let her get away with things. If I called the cops, the wedding would still happen in the meantime, and she'd play the victim, telling everyone how heartless I was for trying to ruin a bride's special day. No, if she was going to play dirty, so would I. But I wouldn't just retaliate. I'd upend her so hard that she'd regret the day she ever thought she could take advantage of me. That night, after the wedding had finally ended and the guests had cleared out, leaving behind a massive mess for me to clean up, I started making phone calls. I had an idea, a perfectly legal yet utterly chaotic idea. If Barbara thought my backyard was prime real estate for events, then fine, I'd turn it into an event space, but not the kind she'd approve of. A local motorcycle club, the Steel Reapers, had been looking for a spot to host their annual rally after getting kicked out of their previous venue. They weren't criminals or anything, but they were loud, rowdy, and the complete opposite of the prim and proper suburban aesthetic Barbara fought so hard to maintain. I found their contact information online and made a call. "Hey," I said once I had their event coordinator on the line. "I heard you guys are looking for a place to host your next gathering. How would you feel about a big, open backyard in the middle of a very, very uptight neighborhood?" The man on the other end chuckled. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious." He paused, clearly intrigued. "What's the catch?" "No catch. Just a personal vendetta against an HOA president who thinks she can use my property without permission. If you guys are up for some loud music, a roaring good time, and a little bit of petty revenge, I'm happy to host." There was silence for a moment. Then he laughed a deep, hearty laugh. "Oh, this I gotta see. Count us in." I grinned. "Perfect." The next morning, Barbara was probably still basking in the glow of her little wedding triumph, thinking she had won. What she didn't know was that in just a few days, she was going to experience a level of neighborhood disturbance she had never imagined. She wanted my yard to be the Como, 90s playground fine. She was about to get exactly that, just not the way she expected. 3 days later, just as the HOA's usual morning committee meeting was wrapping up at Barb Middleton's house, the rumble began. It started as a distant growl, low and steady like an approaching thunderstorm. At first, the HOA members didn't pay it any mind, assuming it was construction work or a particularly loud lawnmower. But then the sound grew, swelling into a chorus of deep, throaty roars that vibrated through the pavement and rattled windows. Barbara stepped outside, cup in hand, and froze. Coming down the street in a staggered formation were nearly 3 dozen motorcycles, gleaming under the sun, their chrome accents flashing as they rolled in like a pack of wolves claiming new territory. The riders wore leather vests adorned with patches, dark sunglasses, and expressions that said they feared nothing. Not nosy neighbors, not community regulations, and certainly not an HOA president with an inflated sense of power. At the front of the group, leading the charge, was Razor, president of the Steel Reapers, a burly man with a thick, grizzled beard. He looked like he'd fought and won more battles than anyone in this neighborhood had ever experienced. As the group pulled up to my driveway, I stepped outside, coffee in hand, as casually as if I had just been expecting an Amazon delivery. "Morning, gentlemen," I said, grinning. Razor killed his engine, looked around, and gave a nod of approval. "Nice setup. Roomy, good space for a gathering." Barbara stormed down the sidewalk toward us, her face an alarming shade of red. "What is going on here?" she shrieked, her voice carrying across the entire street. I sipped my coffee. "Oh, didn't you hear? I decided to rent out my backyard just like you did." The color drained from her face. This is not the same thing," she sputtered, eyes darting from the bikers to me and back again. "Oh, but it is," I said, feigning innocence. "You showed me that under HOA rules, as long as there are no permanent modifications made to the property, events can be hosted freely. That was your defense when you stole my backyard for your niece's wedding, wasn't it? So I thought, why not? It's just for a couple of days." Barbara looked at Razor as if expecting him to apologize for his existence. He just stared back at her, completely unbothered. "This is unacceptable," she screeched. These people." She lowered her voice as if the word itself might summon bad luck. "They can't just set up a motorcycle rally in the middle of a peaceful neighborhood." I shrugged. "Why not? It's for the community, just like the wedding." At that moment, one of the bikers dismounted, stretched, and cracked his neck. "Hey, boss," he called out to Razor. "Where do we set up the barbecue pit?" Barbara's mouth dropped open. "A barbecue pit?" "Oh yeah," I said, nodding. "We've got a whole weekend planned. Barbecue, live music, some fireworks, maybe a little late-night fun, good old-fashioned." She turned, eyes darting frantically toward her house, looking for reinforcements. Some of the other HOA members were peeking out of their windows, horrified, but no one dared to come outside. They were leaving her to handle it, and she knew it. "This will not stand," she hissed. "I'm calling the police." I shrugged again. "Go ahead. I cleared it with the city. We've got all the necessary permits. Noise levels will be within legal limits. Fire regulations are met. and the Steel Reapers have a stellar community reputation. In fact, they do charity events all the time. Did you know that? I let that one sink in. Oh, and I made sure to get a special events permit just in case. Wouldn't want any legal trouble. Barbara clenched her fists so tightly her knuckles turned white. You think this is funny? I gave her the biggest, most satisfied smile I had in my arsenal. Oh, Barbara, I think this is hilarious. The first few hours were an absolute masterpiece of neighborhood disruption. The bikers set up lawn chairs, grills, and a makeshift beer station in my backyard. Rock music blared, not loud enough to violate any noise ordinances, but just enough to rattle the nerves of every stuck-up resident within a 3-block radius. Smoke from a barbecue drifted through the air, the rich, mouth-watering scent of ribs and burgers taunting everyone too prudish to come over and enjoy. The HOA, meanwhile, went into full-blown crisis mode. Barbara had assembled a small group of board members on her front lawn, frantically gesturing as she concocted a plan of attack. I could only imagine the conversation. We have to stop this. How? We're not breaking any rules. There must be some way. The first attempt was a noise complaint. The police showed up, but after a quick check, they found everything in order and left without issue. Then came the property violation notices, letters from the HOA citing obscure, barely enforceable rules. I shredded them without even reading past the first sentence. Next, Barbara personally tried to sabotage the event. She stormed over to the yard and attempted to scold the bikers directly. You people are causing a disturbance. This is a family neighborhood. She barked, arms folded, as if sheer indignation would make them pack up and leave. One of the bikers, a woman named Tank, who, true to her name, looked like she could bench press Barbara's house, crossed her arms and smirked. Funny, seems like the only people disturbed are the ones who weren't invited. Barbara sputtered, but before she could launch into another tirade, one of the biker wives interrupted. "Oh, honey," she said sweetly, stepping closer. "Maybe if you weren't so rude, we'd offer you a plate of barbecue." Barbara practically choked on air. She turned on her heel and stormed off, furious. The next 24 hours were glorious. The Steel Reapers weren't just loud, they were friendly. Kids from the neighborhood wandered over, fascinated by the motorcycles. Elderly neighbors, ones that Barbara had probably terrified. For years, Barbara had suddenly found new friends to chat with. The bikers even helped some folks with yard work, winning them even more unexpected allies. Then came the ultimate moment. Barbara, out of sheer desperation, tried to pull some strings with city officials to shut the event down. But it turned out one of the bikers had an uncle who worked in the mayor's office. The response was a polite but firm denial of her request. By the second night, as I watched Barbara glare from her front window, I knew she had finally realized something. She wasn't going to win this fight. I leaned back in my chair, took a sip of my drink, and let the distant hum of a revving engine lull me into satisfaction. The war had begun, and I was just getting started. The morning after the first night of the biker rally, the HOA was in full panic mode. I woke up to find Barbara and a handful of her most loyal followers standing on the sidewalk in front of my house, whispering in a tight circle like a group of old-school mob bosses plotting a hit. I had barely finished my first sip of coffee before my phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject was immediate violation notice. I sighed before even opening it. As expected, Barbara had fired the first real shot. The email listed a laundry list of supposed infractions: improper use of private property, unauthorized gathering, excessive noise, even though we were within legal limits, unapproved smells, which I assumed was Barbara's petty way of describing the heavenly sin of smoked ribs, and my personal favorite, aesthetic pollution, whatever that was supposed to mean. I almost felt bad for her. She had no idea who she was messing with. By noon, the HOA had officially declared war. It started small, petty fines delivered to my mailbox with increasing frequency. $50 for lawn decorations inconsistent with neighborhood standards. The bikers had parked their motorcycles in a neat row on my driveway. Another $54 for unauthorized signage. Someone had set up a makeshift Welcome Steel Reapers banner on my fence. Then the HOA started weaponizing the neighbors. Barbara went door to door rallying support like a corrupt politician, playing up the horror of dangerous individuals invading our community. A few of my weaker-willed neighbors fell for it, suddenly concerned about their property values, even though the bikers had done nothing but be model guests. I fought back, of course. Every fine she issued, I contested. Every complaint she filed, I appealed. I knew the HOA's own rules better than Barbara did, and I used them against her at every turn. The legal loopholes were endless. While she was busy writing me up for excessive use of outdoor seating, the bikers had set up a few camping chairs. I was in the process of filing a formal grievance against her for using HOA resources for personal gain. After all, wasn't she the one who had thrown a wedding on my property without permission? But Barbara was relentless. When fines and complaints, she escalated to full-on sabotage first. She sent a city inspector to my house. I don't know what lie she fed them, but I was met at my front door by a clipboard-wielding bureaucrat who told me they had received an anonymous complaint about structural hazards on my property. I welcomed them in with open arms. After a full inspection, they found nothing wrong. But by the time they left, I saw Barbara watching from her window, smugly satisfied as if she had just set in motion my inevitable downfall. She had no idea what was coming next. The bikers, meanwhile, weren't just sitting around. Razor and his crew had taken the battle personally. If Barbara wanted to make my life hell, they were going to make hers unbearable. It started with a charity event. One of the bikers had an idea. Why not turn our gathering into something positive? They organized a community outreach program offering free motorcycle rides for neighborhood kids, with parental permission, of course. A cookout raised money for a local veterans fund, and even a free handyman service where the bikers fixed minor home repairs for elderly residents. The results were glorious. People who had been on the fence about the event suddenly loved the bikers. Elder neighbors who had once kept their blinds shut suddenly had brand new porch steps and freshly mowed lawns, all thanks to the Steel Reapers. Kids who had never even seen a real motorcycle before now had grinning pictures of themselves sitting on a Harley. Barbara, however, was livid. The bikers weren't just staying. They were winning people over. She needed a new plan, and that's when she made her biggest mistake yet. Desperate to shut down the event, Barbara sent a false police report. She claimed the bikers were involved in illegal activity, insinuating drug use, vandalism, and general lawlessness. The cops showed up again, only this time they weren't just responding to a noise complaint. They were doing a full investigation. I could see Barbara watching from her porch, her phone in hand, practically vibrating with excitement. She thought she had one, except she hadn't accounted for one little detail. The bikers weren't criminals. They were ex-military, retired firefighters, and blue-collar workers who had never broken a law in their lives. When the police searched the property, they found nothing. No drugs, no illegal activity, just a bunch of guys grilling steaks, fixing motorcycles, and laughing over cold beers. And then the best part, one of the officers recognized Razor. "Hey, aren't you the guy who runs the charity ride for fallen officers?" The cop asked. Razor nodded. "That's me. We do it every year. Some of the funds go to officers' families." The cops exchanged a look. Then, after a brief conversation, they left without issuing a single citation. Barbara's face, watching from across the street, was priceless. But it wasn't over. The cops weren't happy about the false report. They did a little digging. Turns out Barbara had a history of filing exaggerated complaints against people she didn't like. And this time they caught her filing a knowingly false police report, which was illegal. By the next morning, Barbara received a visit from the police herself. She wasn't arrested, but she was fined for wasting police resources and issued a stern warning. And just like that, the cracks in her empire started to show. Her allies in the HOA were getting nervous. She had promised them she would take care of the situation, but instead, she had embarrassed them. Some of them started questioning her leadership. A few even quietly reached out to me, apologizing for siding with her in the first place. By the end of the week, the petition for her removal as HOA president was already circulating. Barbara wasn't just losing the battle, she was losing everything. I sat back in my chair, watching her front door as the reality of her downfall began to set in. She had tried to control me, to manipulate me, to ruin my peace, and now she was the one being destroyed. The war wasn't just over, it was won. Barbara Middleton had ruled the HOA with an iron fist for years, but now her kingdom was crumbling beneath her feet. The false police report had been the beginning of her downfall, but the final blow was the growing number of signatures on the petition to have her removed as HOA president. The once loyal board members who had stood by her through every ridiculous fine and rule enforcement were suddenly nowhere to be found. One by one, they distanced themselves, quietly admitting that perhaps, just maybe, Barbara had taken things a little too far this time. For the first time in her reign, she was losing control. I watched the shift unfold from the best seat in the house, my front porch. Barbara had always carried herself like an untouchable queen, but now she walked with a rigid stiffness, her eyes darting nervously at every neighbor she once commanded. She knew they were talking about her, knew they were whispering about the fines, the failed police report, and now the HOA revolt brewing right under her nose. And then the final straw. An HOA meeting was called, an emergency session, as Barbara dramatically phrased it in her mass email. The subject line read, "Urgent. Neighborhood safety and integrity at risk." It was a last-ditch effort to regain control, to convince everyone that I was the villain and that she had only been doing her duty as HOA president. It did not go as she planned. The meeting was held at the community clubhouse, a space usually reserved for book clubs, bland potlucks, and yoga sessions. But tonight, it was packed with more homeowners than I'd ever seen before, and to my surprise, a few of the Steel Reapers had even shown up, silent, arms crossed, watching. Their presence alone was enough to make Barbara sweat. She stood at the front, clearing her throat, trying to project the same authority she had always wielded so easily. "Thank you all for coming," she yesed. I started forcing a tight-lipped smile. As you all know, our community has been facing some challenges lately, and it is my responsibility to ensure that our neighborhood remains a safe, peaceful, and respectable place to live. There were murmurs. Someone in the back coughed deliberately. I suspected Barbara pressed on, ignoring the tension in the room. It is clear that certain individuals have been exploiting loopholes in our community guidelines, leading to disruptions. Her eyes flicked toward me, then toward the bikers sitting in the back. While I have done everything in my power to maintain order, I have been unfairly targeted by those who do not understand the importance of preserving the integrity of our neighborhood. That was her play. Make it about tradition, about keeping things safe. She should have known better. A voice interrupted her. "You mean you got caught?" The room fell silent. Everyone turned toward the speaker, an older man named Mr. Daniels, who had lived here for over 2 decades. He was one of the few people Barbara had never managed to intimidate. Barbara's smile faltered. "Excuse me?" Mr. Daniels leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Let's not pretend this is about the community, Barbara. You called the cops on an innocent gathering, lied to them, and got caught. And now you want us to believe that you're the victim?" A ripple of agreement ran through the crowd. Another voice spoke up. Mrs. Patel, one of the sweetest, most mild-mannered women in the neighborhood. "You used HOA money for a wedding in someone else's yard, Barbara. That wasn't for the community. That was for you." Barbara's face turned red. "That event was, and let's not forget the fines," someone else cut in. "All those ridiculous fines over nonsense. You fined me $200 because my garden hose was not properly coiled." More murmurs. Then someone actually booed. Barbara's composure cracked. "We needed to enforce the rules. That's what keeps property values high." Mr. Daniels scoffed. "Oh, please. My house was worth more before you started running this place like a dictatorship." Barbara's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She was losing them. The crowd had turned. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everything. The years of micromanagement, the fines, the arbitrary rules, the wedding fiasco. The neighbors had tolerated it for so long, but now that they had an excuse to turn on her, they were taking it with full force. Someone stood up from the back. "We're taking a vote." Barbara's eyes widened. "A vote? This isn't how we do things." But it was how things were done. The HOA had a process for removing a president midterm. It was rarely used, but the rules were clear. If a majority of homeowners agreed, she could be ousted. And right now, The majority was not on her side. The vote happened immediately. No delay, no discussion, a simple show of hands. The result? Barbara was out. She sputtered, demanding recounts, claiming voter fraud. Anything to hold on to her crumbling throne. The decision was final. She was officially removed as HOA president. As I watched her face twist with shock, I realized something. She had never actually considered that she could lose. For years, she had ruled with total authority, unquestioned and unchallenged. The idea that her power wasn't absolute had never crossed her mind, and now she was just another resident, another neighbor, just as powerless as the people she had tormented for years. The aftermath was almost comically swift. Within a week, the HOA was undergoing a complete overhaul. The new leadership, led by a much more reasonable committee, immediately rolled back many of Barbara's ridiculous rules, including the absurd fine system. Homeowners who had been stuck in disputes for months suddenly found their cases dismissed. The best part? The Steel Reapers weren't just tolerated, they were welcomed. The bikers had done more for the neighborhood in 2 weeks than Barbara had done in years. They had repaired fences, helped with heavy lifting, and even organized a charity fundraiser for the local school. As for me, I ran for a position on the HOA board just for the fun of it, and I won. The first thing I did was introduce a new amendment preventing any future HOA board member from using someone else's property without explicit permission. It passed unanimously. Barbara moved away shortly after. She couldn't stand living in a neighborhood that no longer feared her. I heard she tried joining the HOA in her new community, but something told me she'd never regain the same control she once had. As for my backyard, it remained mine, untouched by entitled hands. Once a year, the Steel Reapers still held their barbecue there just to remind the neighborhood what happens when you push the wrong homeowner too far. With Barbara gone, the neighborhood felt different, lighter, freer, almost as if an invisible weight had been lifted from everyone's shoulders. It wasn't just me who noticed it. Neighbors who had once been afraid to speak out suddenly became more social. People started chatting freely on their porches, waving to each other as they walked their dogs, and even daring to add personal touches to their homes without the constant fear of a fine appearing in their mailbox. For the first time in years, the HOA actually functioned the way it was supposed to, as a community, not a dictatorship. As part of the new leadership, I made sure that our first order of business was rolling back all of Barbara's nonsense rules. The fine system was gutted, and unless a violation directly affected someone else's safety or property, it wasn't even worth bringing up. The restriction on lawn furniture? Gone. The rule about mailbox colors? Erased. The ridiculous restrictions on aesthetic uniformity that had prevented people from enjoying their own homes? Abolished. It was the beginning of a new era, and of course, it wouldn't have been complete without one last celebration. The Steel Reapers had made quite an impression on the neighborhood, and to my absolute delight, the new HOA board had officially invited them back for a community event, not just as a biker club, but as honored guests. After everything they'd done, repairing fences, helping elderly neighbors, organizing charity rides, it was only fitting that they got the recognition they deserved. The event was bigger than anything the neighborhood had ever hosted before. Barbecue pits lined the yard, the smell of sizzling meat filling the air. Music played, not too loud, but just enough to keep the energy high. Kids ran around, excited to get another chance to sit on the massive motorcycles lined up like trophies along the driveway. Even the people who had initially been wary of the bikers had come around, realizing that the only thing dangerous about them was their ability to flip an entire HOA on its head. I sat back, sipping a cold drink, watching the scene unfold. Razor plopped down beside me, a plate piled high with ribs and cornbread. "Didn't think I'd ever see an HOA throwing us a party," he said, shaking his head with amusement. I grinned. Funny how things change when people actually get to know each other. He smirked, and when tyrants get booted, that part was especially satisfying. As the night went on, the laughter and conversation grew, blending into the hum of a neighborhood that finally felt alive. It had taken a ridiculous level of pettiness, an unnecessary battle, and a motorcycle club's unexpected help to fix what should have never been broken in the first place. But in the end, it was worth it. Just as I was about to get up and grab another plate of food, Razor tapped my shoulder. Oh, almost forgot. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, tossing it to me. I caught it, turning it over in my hand. A leather patch embroidered with the words Honorary Member, Steel Reapers MC. I raised an eyebrow. You serious? He chuckled. After what you pulled, you're practically one of us. Besides, we always appreciate someone who knows how to get proper revenge. I laughed, shaking my head, but I wasn't about to turn it down. I had never been part of a biker gang before, but honestly, if this was what it meant, good food, good company, and an unshakable sense of loyalty, I wasn't opposed to it. As the night wound down, the last of the guests started to leave, but not before making plans for future gatherings, this time planned with the neighborhood's consent. I lingered for a moment, taking it all in. Barbara had tried to rule this place with an iron fist. She had convinced herself that order meant control, that structure meant oppression, that power meant bending people to her will. But she had forgotten the most important thing. A community isn't built through fear. It's built through trust, through respect, through actually giving a damn about the people around you. And now, this neighborhood, it was better than it had ever been. Now, before I go, I have to know, was I justified in what I did? Should I have let Barbara's wedding stunt slide? Or do you think she got exactly what she deserved? Drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts. And don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed watching karma do its thing. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button because trust me, I've got plenty more insane stories coming your way. Until next time, stay petty, stay vengeful, and never let a tyrant think they can walk all over you.